Hi, students. Here we go with the videos. Coronavirus has kept us all moving here, so I'm just going to start. Here, I'll make this big because I can. Hi. Yeah, so I'm going to be just basically reading over my notes as you just saw, just like I would do in class. Hopefully, the examples can come through on my screen. I don't have a whiteboard to scribble on, but you'll just have to get it as it comes. So we're going to start out. We're here on language, which you should have taken the quiz on the week before spring break. If you didn't, don't worry. We'll just drop 4 quizzes instead of 3. It's not a big deal. Coming up this week, of course, you'll take your normal quiz on infrastructure on Thursday. So remember to do that. Okay, language. Here we go. This is this is the idea that our most basic assumptions are embedded in the basic elements of our everyday lives, and that is communication and cognition too. Language has to do with the acquisition of culture. It has to do with the almost the way um, we see ourselves as human beings. The way we operate basically is very closely connected to language. So all the stories about the feral children, you've probably seen them or heard them. There was one in Middletown a few years, but maybe a decade back or so. There was a girl who was kept um, completely isolated from her from her family, separated, locked in a closet her entire life. She's I don't know 10 or 11 years old. This happens. These are abusive people, parents who are suffer from psychological issues or just awful monsters or whatever. But basically, what happens is these children are raised without ever learning language naturally. And what we find is that they tend to have associated intellectual impairments that aren't really connected to anything else. But I mean, there's abuse involved. There's abuse. There's neglect. But the main thing is the language. If you don't learn language naturally, by the time you're somewhere between 8 and 13, you never learn it that way again. There's a language faculty in the brain. The way you learn language before you're 10 um, is different from the way you learn language in high school or college. You take a language course now, you're using different parts of your brain. So basically, there are ways that the brain works that stop working sometime before puberty. Um, and so when that happens, then you see cognitive differences as well. And so they have these children who are uh, perfectly good people. They're very sweet. They don't talk like the rest of us do, and very often, if they're kept in under these abusive conditions until they're 13 or 14, sometimes they end up being in a group home for the rest of their lives. They can't really function in the same way. Um, and so this is just what we're saying. We're not saying they're not human. Um, we're saying that cognition is very closely connected to language acquisition. There seems to be a kind of critical period of childhood during which languages are learned differently from how they're learned afterwards. There also appears to be a connection between learning a language at this time and cognitive development more broadly. I mean, there's connections to families. They're not being hugged, and that does horrible things psychologically and emotionally as well. But beyond that, the centrality of language and communication to human culture is clarified when we examine the cases of people who have reached an advanced age, somewhere between 9 and 12, before learning language naturally, right? This is spoken language or signed. Either way, uh, these languages are adopted in very different ways after puberty. So, language learning in New Guinea, we have descriptive linguistics. Descriptive linguistics is a field. It does the analysis of the structure of living languages, usually spoken. So, really, what we're interested in is in language, how it's being used in everyday life, not necessarily how it's being written down. We are not interested, for the most part, in written language. Descriptive linguists aren't. um, in general. I mean, sometimes they specialize in that, and definitely texting um, is far more interesting than letter writing because you use it much more naturally when you text. It's much more interactive. There isn't such a concern for spelling errors, typos, that sort of thing. Usually we're studying spoken language. If there's no dictionary or written grammar, how do you know how the language works? By learning it through trial and lots of errors. And that's what Wesch was going through. This is what anthropologists tend to do. So what is a word? The brain is theory builder. Taxonomies here. So we're talking about systems of organization. This is a basic idea in anthropology. Taxonomy, it has nothing to do with taxes. It has to do with systems of classification. So how do you organize the stuff that you see in the world? How do you organize it into objects and actions? How do you organize it into food versus not food? Um, you know, inside versus outside. You know, families versus people who aren't related to us. These are all ways of organizing the world, but they're also linguistic. So there's science and language and basic cognition sort of all wrapped up together. An example of this, you know, the way these systems work, of course, is the Linnaean taxonomy. So Carolus Linnaeus, the scientific pioneer who organized the you know kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, scientific taxonomy, um, genus and species, Homo sapiens, Canis familiaris, etc. This is all scientific, but then we have other kinds of taxonomies as well. For example, when you go to the grocery store, right? I don't know if you've been to Kroger and it's okay, and then you go to another Kroger and it's backwards, right? They have everything flipped around and you can't figure out what's going on. And you also sometimes can't find things. I often go to Kroger. I'm looking for tortillas, and I can't find the tortillas. I look in the bread aisle, no tortillas. Um, so then I have to go to the Mexican aisle, right? You have to go to the international food aisle or the Mexican food aisle or whatever, right? There's a different aisle for it. Sometimes I'm looking for I don't know, stuff that's really obscure, maybe salsa, you know. I'm looking for sauces. Salsa is a sauce, right? It's the same word. Salsa, sauce. Why isn't it with the sauces? Spaghetti sauces? No. It's over there in the Mexican aisle. Like, it's in a glass jar. It's saucy, but they don't put it like that. Why? Because the shoppers around here want to have that Mexican aisle where they find all their Mexican food. Now, if you go down to South Texas, you don't see that. The whole store is Mexican, right? There's no like, oh, this is the Mexican aisle. No, this is the Mexican store, right? The sauces where it should be with the other sauces. Um, so it basically what the grocery store does is it reflects the internal systems of classification that we have in our brains, and it also reflects the systems of classification that the Kroger corporate has in their brains, right? And these sort of merge together, and that's how we get shopping done. So Morris the Moose, yeah, you can go read that kid's book. It's a lot of fun. It's all about the it was a moose. He had the four legs and things on his head, and it was a cow. You know, Morris the Moose is not very smart when it comes to getting outside his own taxonomies. So characteristics of language, we can say that all you know that animals have language. They have communication systems. Um, they have modes of communication. They use these systems to communicate messages. All animal communications have semanticity. The messages contain meanings. All of them have a pragmatic function. The messages do things. Um, some animal communication systems have interchangeability. The same animal can both send and receive messages. Um, and sometimes they have cultural transmission. Some animals learn to do things, especially chimpanzees, in ways that are not innate or instinctual. Most animal behavior is instinct, but some of it is learned occasionally. And some of these systems have arbitrariness. A symbol has no necessary relationship to the thing symbolized. We'll talk about this. Arbitrariness is very important for human language, but animals have it too. And then finally, animal languages, some of them have discreteness, where one symbol correctly given cannot be mistaken for another. So I'm going to pause here because we're at 10 minutes.